Commissioner Adofo from HCO7.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for the opportunity to come before you and to represent Single Member District HCO7. The testimony that all the others have given the public witnesses, I think, is great, and I appreciate it, and it saves me from having to bore you with a lot of statistics. I would like to take a different approach to my testimony when I look at the residents that I represent in my single member district, but just as a district of a whole, I think all of us are very concerned with the amount of violence that we see in our community. And as an advisory neighborhood commissioner, when I sit in the meetings, the civic association meetings, at the rec center, just walking up and down the street, I see a need for a holistic approach to resolving many of the issues that we have around specifically gun violence in our community, but not just physical violence, but the economic violence that we see, the environmental justice violence that we see in our community. And I think both of the bills that are on the docket today coincide with each other. When I look at some of the children that I've worked with at Barry Farms Recreation Center for the last 2 years in the after-school STEM program that we had, our resources in the nonprofit space that I work in with two organizations, the National Society of Black Engineers and the National Black United Front, are very limited. We're working with children in STEM, and it's a blessing to be able to work with the children, but it's also frustrating to know that you only have them for maybe an hour to an hour and a half, and then their parents come and get them, and then sometimes you have to start over from where you were at yesterday because their parents don't have the skill set to continue on and to work with them with what you worked on. And so we have a primary school system. Why not put resources into where children are for 6 to 7, sometimes 8 hours a day to make sure that they're equipped with the skills that they need to be productive citizens and have a fruitful life. And the same can be said for financial literacy. I've worked with Industrial Bank to provide financial literacy classes for children, and what I often find is that their parents are in need of financial literacy as well. And so what you might have been able to work on with a child for 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 weeks over the summer or throughout the school year is inadequate. We see that some children have bills in their name at 8, 9, 10, and 11 years old because their parents were never equipped to do the right thing. And then that sets that child on a trajectory that may be very difficult for them to come back from. And so when I look at the issues of technology, the issues of financial literacy, we need as many resources as we can to help put children on the right trajectory, because at some point, those same children will represent the city and be up there where you all are at. And do we want to have ill-equipped people representing the nation's capital in anything? And the answer to that is no. And so the connection to the violence is that we understand that my grandmother used to tell me, an idle mind is the devil's playground. And so when our children aren't challenged academically, when they aren't given the resources that they need to excel, and when I look at children, I see all children as at-risk youth, no matter what your socioeconomic background is, because you're at risk of being improperly educated. Even the children who go on to be judges will sit there and they'll preside over a case and might not have the cultural competency to understand the background that someone has come from that didn't have the resources. So I think all children are at risk. And I think that we can do more than put resources into athletic programs. You know, we're more than athletes. And I want to see the children in the district that I represent have the resources that they need to succeed. As a commissioner, we often see corporations come in and get contracts to do development in the community, and the children in our community can't participate in that when they become adults because they don't have the skill sets to get the contracts. They can do more than move rocks from one end of the compound to the next. They can do more than be the security guard that's sitting there in the car at night watching the property. They could develop the security systems that are used to maintain these properties. You know, as someone who's also a former veteran, I spoke with a recruiter from the United States Army, and he said that it's very difficult for him to recruit in Ward 8 because many of the children aren't qualifying high enough on the ASVAB to enter into the military. And that's a noble, honorable profession. If we can't get children in our community that want to pursue that route because college may not be for everyone, they're not able to do that. Will this act solve that problem? No. It's a holistic approach to solving this problem, but it is a start. And I would give some pushback and say that it shouldn't just be mandatory for 11th and 12th grade, that it probably should be even earlier than that, at the age when children are eligible for the Summer Youth Employment Program. Because if they're eligible for the Summer Youth Employment Program, then they need to be able to know how to use the resources that they get from that program in order to set themselves on a correct trajectory. So I thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. And I want all acts to pass, but specifically the one in terms of financial literacy, because I understand what it does to the community that I live in, to not have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate that. Ms. Wells. Good morning.
Thank each of you for taking the time to testify. Commissioner Adofo, you mentioned that you do some volunteer work around financial literacy. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
What ages do you usually work with?
We usually start around 9 or 10 years old, but to be honest with you, that's a way to get the parents in to have that conversation is through their children. But primarily 9 or 10-year-old, we feel like that's the ability that the curriculum that Industrial Bank had can start off with, where children can understand the basic finances of a household.
So when Industrial Bank has a program, and they have tailored at least part of that program to 9 and 10-year-olds?
Well, I asked them
Okay.
to do it. I asked them what age could they start with. They said they could go as low as maybe 5 and 6 years old. They had games and things of that nature. But I told them that we had students who were going to be going into the Summer Youth Employment Program. So we wanted to be able to have something for them, because I was told they get a debit card. And I know that's similar to just a check cashing place. And so if they're going to get paid into a debit card, I want to do my due diligence as the commissioner in that community to make sure that we afford them the opportunity to say, hey, before you go out and spend, I want you to consider some of these options.
Yeah. I appreciate 2 recommendations that you made. One was to start earlier than 11th and 12th grade, and the other was to try to pair it with the Marion Barry Summer Youth Leadership Program. Both of these are things that I would like to see as well. With respect to the bill, the cost of the bill, so we could pass a bill, but nothing happens unless we can pay for it.
Yes, sir.
And I didn't want the cost of the bill to be so large that we wouldn't realistically be able to implement it. So I figured it's better to start somewhere and expand. My concern with tying it to the Summer Youth Employment Program was that I couldn't figure out where the young people would have time to have a sufficient course on financial literacy. So I do think it's needed. I just couldn't quite figure out how we would coordinate it. Where would they go? How many classes would they take? And, would employers who are only going to have these young people for a few weeks let them leave, 1 day a week? So just some practical issues that I think we can work through over time. But I do want you to know I agree with the recommendation.
Well, I would say I think that's then becomes more of an issue on the curriculum side, in terms of education as a whole. What are we teaching at the middle school level? I don't feel that one course in a person's lifetime, during, 16, 17 years old is going to put them on the right trajectory until becoming a senior citizen. So maybe if it's just like English. I felt like I had English throughout elementary school, throughout middle school, throughout high school, and to college. And I still don't know if I should put a comma before or after and sometimes, or when to use a colon or a semicolon. And so this, I think, is a critical issue, especially for the vulnerable populations that we have, because we see them continuously make bad mistakes that then cost the government more money on the other end with TIF, housing vouchers, so forth and so on, violence, because they don't have economic opportunities. And so I don't want to see just more money being put into violence prevention programs, and not that that's not necessary, but if we can get to the root of the problem, then we can do a better job at preventing having to spend money on the other end.
I do think those of us who are financially stable, or at least moderately stable, take for granted how unstable so many families are in our city, and the fact that young people many of them don't have the opportunity to learn this. And, you see folks kind of shoot themselves in the foot over and over again because they haven't learned even the basics of financial literacy. To that point,
I think there's a trend here when it comes to financial literacy of trying to give people the opportunity to make mistakes and not harm, have that impact them for the rest of their lives, but also to get it, it's a way of thinking. It's more of lifelong lessons that you learn as you go through life. And some people have greater opportunity than others to learn those lessons when they're younger. And so I think we need to find ways to incorporate it into curriculum more, not just a one-off. And it has to be built into your lessons that you learn as you're becoming a critical thinker, as you're becoming engaged in society. And I think that's the challenge here. We can't really just count on a one-off lesson to do this. When I was a kid, I grew up on a farm, and we had chores we had to do, and I had to take care of the pigs on the farm. And every year we had a hog slaughtering, and we sold the meat, and the money from that went into a bank account at Farmers and Merchants Bank in Lovettsville, Virginia, which was on my name. So even though I was 6, 7, 8 years old, I had this money that built up, and so did I have 5 brothers and sisters. We all had money that we built up. And then that we weren't allowed to dip into that by my parents' request until we went to school, and then we were allowed to use that money to pay for college. And you know, the fact is that it wasn't like it was every day somebody was saying, here's good financial management or here's good financial literacy for you. It was a lesson that we learned along the way about the need to not spend all your money in one day that you earn, or not to, you know, just kind of not have a lot of respect for the future when it comes to financial commitments. And it's not perfect. Obviously, I threw a wrench into it because I didn't go to college right away. So then everyone was like, oh no, what do we do? And, you know, you have to still recognize that people are starting different places. And Commissioner Adofo, you know, getting the ground experience like you do at Berry Farms is so impressive. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming in and testifying and engaging. My concern, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is with the Summer Youth Employment Program is partly what Councilmember White mentioned, the shortness of the program, but also the kind of, it's not very broad, right? I mean, there are a lot of kids that enter in it, but it doesn't reach everyone. And a school-based program, I think, would do a better job reaching everybody. But what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is it just to kind of throw at everything we can at this problem, and so anywhere we can reach kids is best?
Right, well, you know, being poor is very expensive.
That's right.
And so a possible suggestion is before the Summer Youth Employment Program starts, there's a 2 or 3 day or maybe a week training on, you know, how to use your resources, what are some of the best options.
Life skills even.
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
just that, I've often thought that was a wasted opportunity that we didn't do that with the
Right.
program. Go ahead.
No, so I would say that I think that's something that could be implemented, and maybe over time, like Mr. White said, is that you might not be able to do it right away, but if the goal is to embed this into the curriculum, and then maybe that's something that, you know, I see the superintendent can consider in making that part of the curriculum starting at the middle school level, and it being something that is taught every year, you know,
Yeah.
into graduation. But I do think that once is not enough. Elective is a good way to start, but I do not believe that one class, you know, for 10 months is going to set people on a correct trajectory, because it then becomes a lifestyle.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'll just remind folks that OSSI doesn't write curriculums, right? The LEAs do their own curriculums. Now, they can give them guidance on that, which I think is what you're referring to.
Yes, sir.
Which makes some sense, and kind of request that they have certain things as components of curriculum, similar to financial literacy. You know, I appreciate the work that CAB does. I've followed the work. Obviously, any way that we can get money in people's hands that you aren't then saying you have to pay me back on this money, right? So people can make a mistake and not be dinged about it later, but they get to use it to experience is really important. It sounds like your program that you're rolling out makes a lot of sense, and hopefully people will take full advantage of it. Thank you all for your testimony. Thank you.